and George Martin hasn't finished them. Oh, sorry, did I drop a name? Anyway, I hated that. So Eleanor is a complete package. But if you like her story, it continues in Celeste this year and next year in a book called David, which is blow everybody's pants off. What can I say? Yay!
What are some of the themes that you explore in Eleanor? What can a reader take away from it?
Well, the first thing is trust. When we're developing a new book, one of the first things, often before the character, before the plot, before the setting, is the theme. What do I want to talk about? Every book should be about something. This is my mantra. Not a lot of books are. Some books are just mental margaritas. Hallelujah, go for it. That's fine. My training did not allow that. So when I approach a project, I actually make a list of themes I want to explore. Change was obviously one of them. Trust and loneliness. And ultimately it became a PTSD thing, a post-traumatic stress disorder, as I realized this wasn't on my original notes, but by the third book I realized that this was a heavy part of the book, of how to adapt to horrible things that have happened to you. How do you overcome those things? And those were the themes I wrote. So if you look in it, you'll see a lot of course, change and trust issues, trust everywhere, because you trust no one kind of thing. But ultimately, you'll also realize that we have a very flawed character here who's struggling with demons that we learn about a little bit at a time, and just a complete hopelessness you can get out of these situations. When you're so afraid to trust, when you finally do have nobody, what do you do? So those are some of the greater themes I investigated in Eleanor. They're pretty cool. They're pretty cool. You can write papers on this. Go ahead. English teachers out there, you need to buy this book and have everybody write essays and then send it to me. I want to read them.
So you briefly mentioned some of your upcoming projects. Tell us a little more about those.
My next book out is called The Brand Demand. It's a political mystery. I've always loved mysteries. I had a teacher at the University of Utah, Robert Casario, who told me that every book is a mystery if you look at it right, because you don't know what's going to happen. It came from an angry time in my life when I was frustrated with the world. I was frustrated with the way things were going and wondered why people weren't doing more to help. I kind of re-envisioned Edward Abbey's Monkey Wrench Gang. Back when I was in college, Edward Abbey was a household name. He wrote some absolutely fantastic naturalistic treatise on desert solitaire, for example, where he explored the Red Rock deserts and everything, and basically turned, I believe single-handedly, turned Moab into a destination because of his descriptions of it. He was a very environmental friendly man, and he wrote a story, a fiction called The Monkey Wrench Gang, where a group of activists try to slow down clear cutting and ecological destruction around Moab in the 70s. Well, things have gotten much worse, of course. I like the idea of the activism and having a bit of fun with that. So I envisioned a modern day Monkey Wrench Gang of sorts, but with a wider scale. They're not just environmentalists, they're just after hypocrites. So the book begins where our hero, Galen Reed, he just blackmailed a bishop who was doing something naughty. And so what he does is he finds hypocrites and bad people and he blackmails them. He hits them where it hurts, and he punishes them. He's a video gamer. He calls himself Just Pain, meaning justified pain. He hurts people who have it coming. And it all takes place in Salt Lake City, so it's a local color story as well. And he goes after a local celebrity magnate who owns a lot of talk radio shows, but he can't reach him. He's too far out of his league to reach him. But he learns that the magnate, Carson, has a son-in-law who's cheating on his daughter. Well, the son-in-law is open for attack, so he goes after him. His name is Brand. So he tries to blackmail Brand for so much that he will embezzle the money from Carson, and thus he'll hurt Carson and embarrass him, and, and justice will be served. Well, everything goes to crap. And Galen has to explore the limitations of his own ideology, because he's had a political awakening when he was young, and chosen basically monastic life to dedicate himself to this cause. And it gets challenged, as does his loneliness and everything. This was a particularly fun book to write because I knew the climax instantly. Everything else came from that. You've heard of writing a mystery from the end backwards, right? Mm-hmm. This was it. I always knew what the final conflict and the moment would be. The final paragraph, the final page of that book I had in my head, and then wrote the rest of it to lead to it. And that was what I always knew I'd have. Anyway, so that's coming out in April from Cherokee McGee, a Virginia publisher. It'll be widely distributed. I'm looking forward to that. Finally, my foray into adult mystery. And then Celeste in July.
I loved this idea of this V for Vendetta type character who's going around punishing these hypocrites in high places. Mm-hmm. But then when you pull the rug out and he has a major paradigm shift, then I'm totally sold. Yeah. That's really intriguing. What I find impressive about you is how much you believe in your own writings. Sometimes when something gets a bad review, we think that we're not that good, we doubt ourselves. How do you get this sort of confidence in your own abilities?
I'm heavily sedated. No, it's Well, actually, I guess there's denial. I love my books. I got asked I got an interview the other day and said, who's your favorite writer? And I thought about that and said, I am. Nobody understands me the way I do. I love all my books. They're all just my children. I love them so much. I don't read my reviews very often. So far, I haven't had to. Nobody said, oh, well, okay, I did read one bad one. She didn't know what she was talking about. She hadn't read the book, I know it. But you've got to be enthusiastic for these things. I mean, if you don't like what you write, how are you ever going to get anybody else to read them? And they've all kind of come out their own different ways out of my psyche. If you're a writer and an artist, you're fundamentally dealing with problems you have. You are actually just bleeding on the page. That's why it's so strange to sell your bandages to the public. You are addressing concerns, problems, fears you have yourself, right? And granted, you might hide them in a fantasy setting, but there's ultimately the problems you're dealing with. This is a psychological bandage, and then you have to sell them. So, on the other hand, they're very truthful that way, and you explore them. And you do. I love my books. I love them all. I think they're all just stellar. I don't know how to even say this, but I go back and read some of the stuff I've written, new books, old books, stuff I'm working on, and I'm often shocked I don't remember writing it. I say, did I write this? This is good. And then, of course, once in a while you look at this and you say, oh, my God, did I write that? No, call the publisher, take out this comma. I've done that, too. But a lot of people talk about the muse, and I'm one of them. I really think that you can tap into something, your subconscious or a higher power or something when you're writing to express these things.
I think a lot of people are so afraid of being accused of narcissism or pride that they debase themselves and they don't really see how brilliant their own works are.
Well, I don't know if I'd call them. I love mine, but like I say, they're pushing my buttons. I mean, honestly, they might not be for everybody. For example, Beatrice, I can't recommend that to everyone. That is a dark book. In Beatrice, I explore love, the dark sides of love. When I was in Oregon, a couple of my friends were getting divorces. It's like a contagious disease in circles of friends. I couldn't believe it. It was rampant. One couple would have a problem and it would spread to another and another and another, and it was terrifying. My wife and I grabbed each other and ran and hid in the basement for 6 months till this contagion washed away. But what struck me on that, these people who I knew, who had watched love each other unconditionally a year before, had turned into such bitter enemies 12 months later. And I just realized that there's a dark side to this passion in love. And that was my theme when I explored in Beatrice. But I approached it from an angle of the occult. There's not a lot of books on the occult, at least not a lot of fiction books on the occult. There's a lot of books about magic. There's a lot of books about paranormal and stuff. In that particular book, there's no light without darkness, no love without hate, no passion without jealousy, and demons are hungry for flesh. It is a stark book. It is not a young adult book at all. It's horror. Though I never thought of it as horror, I always thought of it as a love story, and then I got picked up by horror writers everywhere and said, no, this is a horror, you're crazy. So those themes, let alone the language and the situations and the violence and that, I would not put in anywhere else. However, it did get me through that time. It's, again, a psychological Band-Aid of that pain that happened. I wrote it years after that particular crisis, but I saw it happen, and I needed to work through it. So I wrote the book, and it just flowed out again. And I'm very proud of it as well. But it's not one that I can recommend to everyone.
What advice do you have for would-be authors out there who are trying to get into writing and publishing?
The difference between a professional writer and an amateur writer is a professional never gave up. That's really what I can say. I looked at the odds here. I knew what I was getting into. It's never been easier to be published. It's never been harder to be read. I knew the odds. It was difficult to find readership. It's difficult. This is a tough job. However, if you go into it knowing that, and you change your metrics to better reflect personal goals, lifelong goals, I don't think there's anything better for it. And you just keep trying. You have to measure how much rejection you can take at a certain blow. Like I have a rule. I send out 5 requests. I call them requests for rejection, but they're actually called queries. I send out 5 queries a week.
You have such a great attitude.
Yeah, and I get the rejections. And I guess there's a story of Stephen King. When he'd get a rejection, this is in the old days before the internet, and they weren't emailed form letters, but they were mailed form letters. He'd take them, and he would put them on a nail against his wall. He'd tack them up on his wall. Mm-hmm. And then, after a while, he had to change out the nail for a spike. So that's the same kind of thing I did. What I've done, actually, in my rejections wall, and I have thousands of rejections now. When I get a rejection, I will print it out, if it came by mail, I'll just tape it up. And so I tape it up against the door. So I'm like 6 layers deep over a whole door, and I go in there and I look at it, and it just tells me I'm trying. They all hurt. Every one of them stung. I can still remember where I was the moment I got my first one. And you just keep trying. Or you can always try to self-publish. There are ways to get out there if you want to keep trying. But mostly you write every day. You make this your life. It's hard. If you're doing it just because you think you should do it, you almost have to be driven to it. Unless you catch lightning in a bottle and your first thing gets picked up, or you happen to be born the only child of a New York publisher, you're going to have a hard time getting your work out there and noticed. But I think there's no substitution. Let's put it this way. If it's a 1 in a million chance, you have to try 1,000,000 times. And that's kind of what I think you have to do. Keep writing and write another book. Those are the two biggest things I can say. Write another book, keep writing, and write another book.
I really like that 1 in a million thing, because I think we all do think we're going to get a lucky break, and we know the odds are against us, and we try, and then it doesn't work, and that's often where we give up. I've heard a lot of authors talk about rituals like that, where they keep their rejection notices, and I think we just need to hear reminders about that. We need to hear how hard it is, and what the odds are, and what reality is, so it's good to hear reminders like that.
Yeah, it really is, and the whole thing's up on its ear right now. Publishing industry is changing so quickly. I mean, you'll hear this from everybody, but the big 5 publishers, they don't even know what's going on anymore. Amazon's now becoming the most powerful player in the game. When I was in college, again, back in the old days when we had to walk to school uphill twice, we were told you had to get an agent. And I have been trying an agent. Most of my rejections, 90% of them are agents. I'm trying to get an agent. I'm trying to break into the big 5. I'm trying to get into Macmillan or Random House or Scholastic or something, to get those kind of backing. Publishers, however, have been very receptive to my work. I found if you've written something and you're having problems with agents, I'm talking to people out there, try looking up publishers themselves. Not necessarily the big 5. They have a gatekeeper and they still do agents because they're backwards. But the publishing industry has changed so much. There are many small publishers who are so much more willing to try new authors, to try something experimental and unusual. They're hungry for it. And your voice can be so much more easily publicized through them than trying to get the attention of an agent who is strictly bottom line. And if you're not bringing something totally knock your socks off, they probably don't even have time for you. I've talked to some New York agents and they get thousands of queries a month. Thousands. So no wonder you get ignored. You might have just what they're looking for, but that particular day they were in a hurry and just didn't want to read it. Or their bagel wasn't the way they wanted it. They're in a foul mood. It's really very subjective. You got to know that. And the best agents will actually mention that in their rejection form letters. It's a subjective business. Keep trying. God bless you. But yeah, it's still frustrating. So I've had my most success with small presses and just keep trying. Right now I have one book that I'm shopping exclusively to agents, and I will stop that at the end of this month and get the darn thing published because it gave everybody a year to pick it up, and yet didn't.
Well, one thing I remember very vividly when we did a panel together was how you ended your closing remarks, and you said the only way to achieve your dreams is to help others achieve theirs. I love that. In fact, I make that our motto on this show.
Well, I love that. Yeah, that's one of the ways that I consider myself being paid for this, is helping out. I don't know everything there is to know about this. I still get my mind blown listening to Dan Wells or Michael Brent Collins or Larry Correia, what their experiences have been, how they've done it. Always learning new things. However, I've made a lot of mistakes, and I can at least tell you what the mistakes I've made. You could avoid those. Reaching out to other authors is just nice because I love authors. I think authors are very interesting people. If there's a room full of people and there's 2 authors in the room, they're going to find each other and they're going to have the best conversation in the room because authors have sanded down their fingerprints until they can feel silk. Their emotions are more easily touched because they want to get that sensation to replicate it. They experience more, they express more. I'm not saying that everybody who doesn't write doesn't have these things, but it's my experience that I get along very well with writers, better than I do with actors, better than I do with policemen who pull me over for speeding 5 miles over the limit. Who does that? So anyway, if you've dedicated your life to expression and experience, how can you be anything other than interesting? And I just love giving back to them. If there's anything I can help them with, I like to give concrete, actionable advice, not just, well, you need to have a good heart. I had a breakout year last year at LTUE because I actually gave concrete bullet points on ways to approach things, and that has since rolled into the Writer of the Year. Because I tried very consciously to give useful advice, things that I know that I've tried and tried. Next year my advice might be different, but right now this is the best I got. And I'll give it to you because it's not a zero-sum game. If you and I are writing the same genre, we should be friends, not enemies, never enemies, because your readers will read mine. It takes you and me 6 months to write a book, a year maybe. How many books can you read in a year? Lots. 2 maybe. You know. But you see what I'm saying is that it's not a zero-sum game. And that's the magic of writing and art.